The meeting had been long, the air thick with pipe smoke and the weight of unspoken futures. We'd talked ourselves hoarse for weeks, months even, about the duties, the taxes, the principle of it all. No representation, no taxation. It was a simple truth, yet they across the ocean refused to hear it. This last shipment, the East India Company's tea, sitting in Griffin's Wharf, was the final insult. It wasn't just tea, it was a symbol, a challenge. My hands still smelled faintly of the lamp oil I'd used to darken my face. It was a crude job, but effective enough in the dim light of the docks. A blanket, torn and stained, served as my disguise, draped over my shoulders, pulled tight around my head. Others had feathers, paint, whatever they could find to mimic the mohawk. It wasn't about fooling anyone into thinking we were actual natives, it was about anonymity, about a collective identity, about sending a message that wasn't tied to any single man. We were the Sons of Liberty, yes, but tonight, we were something else, something wilder, more primal. The walk to the wharf was a strange mix of silence and muffled excitement. Hundreds of us, moving through the narrow streets, a silent tide. I recognized a few men by their gait, by the way they held their shoulders, but we didn't speak. A nod, a shared glance, that was all. The air was cold, sharp with the scent of the sea and something else, something like anticipation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat against the quiet night. I thought of Mary, asleep in our bed, unaware of the history being made, or perhaps, the trouble being stirred. I pushed the thought away. This was for her, for our children, for the future of this town, this colony. We reached the wharf. The ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, the Beaver, loomed in the darkness, their masts scraping against the sky. A few lanterns glowed, casting long, dancing shadows. The crowd swelled, but it wasn't a mob. There was an order to it, a quiet determination. Someone gave a low command, and we moved, a wave breaking over the gangplanks. I found myself on the deck of the Dartmouth. The air here was different, heavy with the smell of tar and salt and the faint, sweet scent of tea. The ship's crew, mostly sympathetic, stood aside, offering no resistance. They knew what this was. They knew why we were here. Some even offered quiet encouragement. One young sailor, no older than my own son, gave me a quick, almost imperceptible wink as I passed. It was a strange moment, a shared understanding across a divide that was supposed to be hostile. The hatches were open. Below, in the hold, sat the chests. Hundreds of them. Each one a symbol of oppression, of a distant power dictating our lives. The first chest was hauled up, heavy and unwieldy. The wood was rough beneath my gloved hands. I remember the sound it made as it scraped against the deck, a low groan that seemed to echo the frustration of years. Someone shouted, "Heave ho," and we lifted it, swung it over the rail. The splash was satisfying, a deep, resonant thud that sent ripples across the dark water. It wasn't just water, it was the harbor, the very lifeblood of Boston, now receiving our defiance. I worked steadily, methodically. Chest after chest. The rhythm was hypnotic. Haul, swing, splash. The air grew colder, but I didn't notice. My muscles ached, but the pain was a dull background hum. My mind was clear, focused on the task. I saw a man next to me, his face smeared with lampblack like mine, his eyes wide with a fierce joy. He grunted with effort, then let out a low, guttural sound as a chest hit the water. It wasn't a cheer, more like a release. At one point, a small, wooden box, not a tea chest, fell from someone's pocket. It clattered on the deck. I bent to pick it up, thinking it was a tool, but it was a child's toy, a carved bird. I handed it back to the man, who mumbled a quick thanks, his voice surprisingly young. It was a jarring moment, a reminder of the ordinary lives we led, the families we left behind, the innocence we were fighting to preserve. This wasn't just about politics, it was about the small, precious things. Another man, older, with a limp, struggled with a particularly heavy chest. I moved to help him, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was no fear, no hesitation, only a shared resolve. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of our common purpose. We were all in this together, bound by the same anger, the same hope. The smell of tea began to permeate the air, a strong, earthy aroma mixing with the salt and tar. It was a strange irony, destroying something so valuable, something that brought comfort to so many. But it wasn't about the tea itself. It was about what it represented. Each splash was a statement, a rejection. I remember a moment when a small gust of wind caught my blanket, pulling it back from my face. For a split second, I felt exposed, vulnerable. But then I saw the faces around me, all similarly disguised, all focused on the task. We were a single entity, a force of nature. The wind died down, and I pulled the blanket tighter. The anonymity was a shield, but also a bond. Someone started humming a low tune, a familiar folk song, but it was quickly hushed. This was not a celebration, not yet. This was an act of solemn protest, a desperate measure. The only sounds were the creak of the ropes, the splash of the chests, and the heavy breathing of men at work. As the hours passed, the piles of chests dwindled. The hold was emptying. My arms ached, my back protested, but a strange exhilaration began to build. We were doing it. We were actually doing it. The impossible, the unthinkable, was becoming reality. I saw a man carefully sweep the deck with a broom, gathering stray tea leaves that had spilled from broken chests. He was meticulous, almost obsessive. No damage to the ship, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Only the tea. It was a point of honor, a demonstration that our anger was directed, not wanton destruction. We were not vandals, we were patriots. The last chest on my ship was lifted. It felt lighter, almost buoyant, as if the weight of its symbolism had been shed. I watched it arc through the air, a dark silhouette against the slightly less dark sky, and plunge into the water. The final splash was different, not just a thud, but a sigh, a release. We gathered our tools, our axes and ropes, and began to disembark. The crowd on the wharf had thinned, but those who remained watched in silence, their faces unreadable in the gloom. There was no cheering, no applause. Just a profound quiet, a shared understanding of the magnitude of what had just transpired. The walk home was different from the walk to the wharf. The tension had eased, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment, but also a deep uncertainty. What would happen now? How would they react? The arguments were far from over, but tonight, we had made our point. We had spoken in a language they could not ignore. I peeled off the lampblack from my face as I walked, feeling the cold air on my skin. The blanket felt heavy, no longer a disguise but a shroud of memory. I thought of the tea, floating in the harbor, a dark, bitter brew. It was a sacrifice, a statement, a line drawn in the sand, or rather, in the water. Reaching my door, I paused. The house was dark, quiet. Mary was still asleep. I slipped inside, moving silently, shedding my clothes, washing the last traces of the night from my hands and face. I lay in bed, next to her, listening to her soft breathing. My body was tired, but my mind was alight. The arguments about taxation, about representation, about liberty, they would continue. They would escalate. This was just the beginning. But for me, tonight, the argument was closed. I had acted. I had stood with my neighbors, my countrymen, and we had defied. The choice had been made. The line had been crossed. And in that quiet, dark room, I felt a strange, profound peace. The future was uncertain, but my part in it, for this night, was done. I had been disguised, and I had been defiant. And that was enough.